Look, I've been working at the Galactic Council's Trial Administration Office for 73 cycles now, and I've learned one fundamental truth about the universe. Every species thinks they're special. They all show up here with their puffed-up thoraxes or inflated gas sacs or whatever they use to display confidence, absolutely convinced they'll be the ones to crack the neuromorphic labyrinth. Spoiler alert, they never are. My name's Crix. I'm a Vendorian, which means I've got 4 arms, 3 eyes, and exactly 0 patience for theatrical displays of bravado. My job is to process the candidates who think they can beat the maze, watch them fail spectacularly, then file the paperwork while they're being scraped off the walls. Metaphorically speaking. Usually, the neuromorphic labyrinth isn't just some fancy hallway with tricky turns. Oh no, this thing is a living, breathing nightmare designed by the ancient progenitors back when they were apparently really bored and really sadistic. It's a quantum construct that literally rewires itself based on how you think. Your species is superlogical? Congratulations, the maze becomes an impossible mathematical paradox. You're an emotional, empathetic race. Great, now you get to feel the existential dread of every wrong decision you've ever made, amplified by a factor of several thousand. In 3,000 years, 847 species have attempted the trial. Exactly 0 have succeeded. The maze remains undefeated, sitting in its containment facility like a malevolent cosmic brain teaser that actively hates you. Which brings me to today, and the human standing in front of my desk. "Jake Martinez," he said, extending one of his appendages. A hand, I think they call it. "I'm here for the maze thing." I stared at him with all 3 of my eyes, which I've been told is unsettling. He just smiled back, completely unbothered. He was wearing what I would later learn humans call cargo shorts, which are apparently pants that gave up halfway, and something called a fanny pack strapped around his midsection. His clothing choices alone should have disqualified him. "The maze thing," I repeated slowly. "You mean the neuromorphic labyrinth. The trial that has broken every single species that's attempted it for 3 millennia. The cosmic horror that requires 6 months of psychological preparation and a legal waiver 17 pages long. That maze thing. Yeah, that sounds right." He was still smiling. Why was he still smiling? I pulled up his species file on my datapad. Humans, relatively new to the galactic scene. Carbon-based, disappointingly bilateral, only 2 eyes. Recently discovered faster-than-light travel by apparently duct-taping a quantum drive to a fusion reactor and hoping for the best. The engineering corps was still having panic attacks about it. "Mr. Martinez, do you understand what's at stake here? If you fail, which you will, your entire species loses their application for advanced space travel rights. You'll be restricted to your home system for another 500 cycles minimum." "Yep." He was now examining my office plant, which is a carnivorous species from Deneb 7. It was examining him back. "Cool plant. Does it bite?" "Only beings with insufficient electrical resistance. Mr. Martinez, are you listening to me?" "Sure am." He turned back to me, still radiating that unsettling calm. "Go into maze, reach the center, grab the shiny thing, get humanity our space license. Pretty straightforward." Straightforward. He thought the neuromorphic labyrinth was straightforward. I felt one of my antennae twitch, which happens when I'm developing a stress headache. The beacon of ascension isn't just a shiny thing. It's a metaphysical construct representing your species' worthiness to join advanced galactic civilization. And nobody just grabs it. The current record for survival time inside the maze is 47 hours of continuous screaming before the candidate begged for extraction. "Huh." Jake scratched his head. "Well, I packed a sandwich, so I should be good." A sandwich. He packed a sandwich for a reality-warping death maze. I began filling out the psychological evaluation forms, checking boxes I never thought I'd need to check. Under candidate's mental state, I created a new category, concerningly unaware of danger. "One last time, Mr. Martinez. The maze adapts to your cognition. It will find your deepest fears, your logical inconsistencies, your psychological weaknesses, and it will exploit them until you break. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" He thought about this for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah, sounds fun. Where do I sign?" I slid the 17-page waiver across my desk. He signed it without reading a single word, which was somehow both the most horrifying and most human thing I'd witnessed in my career. As I led him to the maze facility, I activated my recording implant. If humanity was about to lose their shot at the stars because of one overconfident idiot in cargo shorts, I wanted documentation. For the archives, and possibly for the memorial service. The massive doors to the containment facility hissed open, revealing the entrance to the neuromorphic labyrinth. It looked innocuous enough. A simple archway made of some material that existed in 5 dimensions simultaneously. Beyond it was darkness that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at it. Jake stepped up to the entrance, adjusting his fanny pack like he was heading to a theme park. "Any questions before you begin?" I asked, more out of protocol than hope. "Yeah, actually. Is there a bathroom in there?" "It's a reality-warping cosmic trial, not a rest stop." Right. Probably should have gone before." "Oh well." He shrugged and walked toward the entrance. I watched him disappear into the darkness, then trudged back to the control room. Time to start the failure countdown. I gave him 20 minutes, tops. Humans seemed confident, but the maze had humbled species far more advanced. Little did I know, I was about to witness something that would make me question everything I understood about intelligence, consciousness, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Or, as Jake would later put it, "Yeah, that was weird." Before I get to the part where everything I knew about the universe fell apart, let me give you some context about exactly how terrible the neuromorphic labyrinth is at its job. And by terrible, I mean perfectly, horrifyingly effective. See, the control room where I monitor these attempts has a wall. We call it the Wall of Shame. Though officially it's designated the Memorial Record of Attempted Ascensions. It's covered with species names, attempt durations, and brief descriptions of exactly how the maze destroyed them. It's like a greatest hits album of psychological warfare. And I've got the whole thing memorized because I've got nothing better to do during the centuries between attempts. Let me walk you through some recent favorites. The Vothrax came in about 50 cycles ago. Crystalline beings, pure logic, no emotions whatsoever. They communicate through mathematical proofs and consider poetry to be a form of mental illness. Their entire civilization is built on calculating the most efficient solution to every problem. Naturally, they were supremely confident about the maze. The labyrinth took one look at their logical little crystal brains and said, "Oh, you like math? Let me show you some math." It generated a paradox loop where every corridor was the solution to an equation, but solving that equation changed the previous corridor's equation, which invalidated your current position. Which meant you never actually moved forward. You were just solving infinite math problems while standing still. The Vothrax candidate is still in there. Well, technically, his consciousness is still trying to compute the solution. We've tried explaining that there isn't one, that it's a paradox by design, but he can't hear us over the sound of his own calculation matrices. Every few months we get a transmission from inside. Nearly there, just 17,000 more dimensions to account for. Poor guy. Then there were the Zelnari. Beautiful species, these ones. They're empathic, telepathic, all about feelings and emotional connections. They can sense the moods of beings from half a sector away. Their candidate, a flowing energy being named Luzathara, thought her emotional intelligence would let her navigate the maze by feeling the correct path. The maze felt her feelings right back, with interest. It made her experience the emotional weight of every wrong turn, every bad decision, every path not taken. Not just her own regrets, mind you. Every regret, every sorrow, every moment of despair from every being who'd ever attempted the maze before her. 3,000 years of accumulated bad feelings, piped directly into her consciousness. We extracted her after 4 hours, when she started broadcasting psychic screams that were giving the entire facility depression. She's in therapy now. Expected recovery time. Sometime after the heat death of the universe, probably. The Korath were my personal favorite disaster. They're a hive mind species, thousands of individual bugs that function as one consciousness. Brilliant strategy, they thought. The maze can't confuse a hive mind because we think collectively. We have redundancy. We're basically unconfusable. The maze looked at their networked consciousness and thought, challenge accepted. It split them up. Spatially, all the bugs were still together, But mentally, it divided their hive mind into 40,000 individual perspectives, each experiencing the maze differently, each convinced they were the primary consciousness. They spent 6 months wandering in circles, arguing with themselves about which direction was forward. When we finally extracted them, half the swarm thought the other half were elaborate hallucinations. They reunified eventually, but I heard they have trust issues now, with themselves. Oh, and the Krell? 4-dimensional beings who experience time non-linearly. The maze made them experience every possible future simultaneously, including all the futures where they failed. They knew they were going to fail before they started, which meant they had failed from their perspective, which created a temporal paradox that gave them the mother of all headaches. Duration: 17 minutes before they phased back to their home dimension, muttering something about sticking to regular 3-dimensional space. Thank you very much. I could go on. The silicon-based Zorgons, who thought being non-biological made them immune to psychological manipulation. The maze convinced them they were actually organic and dying of silicon poisoning. The psionic masters of Rigel 9, who could manipulate matter with their minds. The maze made them doubt whether matter was real at all, which caused their powers to backfire spectacularly. Every single species came in with a plan, with confidence, with some unique trait they thought would give them the edge. And every single one left broken, confused, or still trapped in mathematical purgatory, like our friend the Vothrax crystal. The record holder, by the way, was a being called Thexmor from the warrior caste of Draxus Prime. Massive species, all muscle and battle fury, thought they could just intimidate the maze into submission through sheer aggressive willpower. They lasted 47 hours of pure rage screaming before their vocal cords dissolved, and they had to be extracted for medical reasons. We gave them a commemorative plaque. They threw it at me. All of this ran through my head as I settled into my chair in the control room and pulled up the monitoring feeds. The neuromorphic labyrinth was now active, its quantum matrices spinning up to analyze Jake Martinez's cognitive patterns. I could see him on the entrance camera, standing just inside the archway, looking around like he'd wandered into the wrong building. The maze's AI core hummed to life beside me, displaying its analysis readouts. I watched the screens, waiting for the inevitable moment when Jake's mind would be scanned, categorized, and subsequently destroyed. The readouts flickered, then flickered again, then displayed a message I'd never seen before. Analyzing cognitive pattern. Analysis inconclusive, attempting secondary scan. I leaned forward. In 73 cycles, the maze had never needed a secondary scan. It usually had your entire psychological profile mapped in approximately 4 seconds. On the video feed, Jake pulled out his sandwich and took a bite. The readouts continued to flicker. Analysis inconclusive. Subject cognition does not match known parameters. Initiating adaptive restructuring. I watched, fascinated as Jake finished chewing, looked at the corridor branching to his left, then at the one to his right. He appeared to think about it for maybe half a second, then shrugged and went right. Just like that. No careful analysis, no logical deduction, no deep meditation on the choice. Just, hey, that one looks fine. The maze's readouts went berserk. I sat back in my chair, all 4 of my arms crossed, and had a terrible creeping suspicion that I was about to have a very, very long day. Or, more accurately, a very, very short one. Because something was already going wrong with the most perfect trial in galactic history. And Jake Martinez was about to become either the savior of humanity or the punchline to a joke that would echo through the cosmos for millennia. Possibly both. Okay, so here's where things got weird. And I know what you're thinking. Crix, how could things get weirder than a reality-warping maze that's defeated 847 species? Just trust me on this one. Jake Martinez walked into the labyrinth like he was taking a casual stroll through a park. Not even a nice park, like a mediocre park with questionable landscaping. The kind of walk where you're not really paying attention because you're thinking about what you're having for dinner. The maze, meanwhile, was working overtime. I could see the quantum processors in the control systems running hot, trying desperately to analyze this human's thought patterns and adapt accordingly. The whole point of the neuromorphic labyrinth is that it reads your cognition and becomes your perfect nightmare. It's supposed to be elegant, efficient, and absolutely devastating. Jake took another bite of his sandwich. The sensors detected something the maze AI labeled as turkey and cheese, possibly with mustard. Let me describe what the maze was trying to do. It started with the standard approach: optical illusions. Corridors that looked like they went straight but actually curved. Floors that appeared solid but were actually at a 15-degree angle. The classics. Jake didn't notice. Not because he was clever enough to see through them, but because he genuinely was not paying attention. He was humming something. The audio pickups caught it. Some tune that the human database identified as Old Town Road. Whatever that meant. The maze created a corridor that existed in two places simultaneously. A quantum superposition that should have broken Jake's brain trying to process it. He walked through it while examining his fingernails. Okay, I muttered to myself in the control room. Maybe he's just lucky. The maze hasn't really ramped up yet. As if hearing my thoughts, the labyrinth kicked into high gear. It manifested Jake's fears. This is usually where candidates start screaming. The maze pulls from your subconscious, finds what terrifies you most, and makes it real, or real enough that your brain can't tell the difference. For the Zelnari, it had been emotional isolation. For the Krell, temporal dissolution. For the warrior Thexmore, it had been tiny, harmless birds, which was a surprise to everyone, including Thexmore. For Jake Martinez, apparently, it was a manifestation of himself giving a presentation to his high school class while forgetting to wear pants. He looked at it, waved, and said, "Yeah, that was a rough Tuesday." Then he walked past his own fear, took another bite of sandwich, and turned left at a junction for no apparent reason. The maze's AI was now displaying error messages. Actual error messages. Lines of code I'd never seen before scrolled across my screens. Fear response: insufficient. Attempting alternative stimulus. The labyrinth tried embarrassment. Jake's response: who hasn't been there? It tried existential dread, manifesting the vast emptiness of space and the meaninglessness of existence. Jake's response: a thoughtful huh, before continuing forward. It tried impossible geometry, creating an M.C. Escher nightmare of stairs that led nowhere and doors that opened into themselves. Jake somehow ended up closer to the center. I still don't understand the physics of how that worked. The maze's own spatial calculations came back with question marks. 15 minutes in, and Jake had progressed further than any candidate in recorded history. The control room started getting visitors. First my supervisor, Kelnax, who has approximately 7 doctorates in quantum psychology and thought she'd seen everything. "What is he doing?" she asked, her tentacles twitching with confusion. "Walking," I said. "Just walking and eating a sandwich." "No, what's his strategy? What pattern is he following?" I pulled up the cognitive analysis, which was still running and still coming back inconclusive. As far as I can tell, he's looking at each intersection, thinking something along the lines of, "That way seems okay," and then going that way. There's no pattern, no logic, no emotional reasoning. That's impossible. Every species has cognitive patterns. The maze adapts to patterns. Yeah, well, tell that to the maze. It's currently trying to generate a philosophical paradox about the nature of free will. On screen, Jake encountered the philosophical manifestation. It was a glowing entity that posed the question, if your choices are predetermined by your neural patterns, do you truly have agency, or are you merely a biological machine following programming? Jake looked at it, scratched his head, and said, "Dunno, probably pizza." Then he walked through the entity like it wasn't there. The philosophical construct flickered and disappeared, apparently too confused to continue existing. "Did he just—" Kelnax started. "Yeah." "By saying probably pizza?" "Yep." "That doesn't even make sense as an answer." "I don't think he was trying to answer. I think he was actually thinking about pizza." More council members arrived. The viewing room was getting crowded. Word was spreading through the facility that something unprecedented was happening. Someone from the engineering department showed up with recording equipment, muttering about needing documentation for the journals. 20 minutes in, Jake stopped to tie his shoe. Just stopped, right in the middle of a corridor that was actively trying to create a gravity well around him, and tied his shoe. The maze interpreted this as a tactical pause, a moment of strategic consideration. It analyzed his position, calculated probable next moves, and restructured itself accordingly. created what it determined to be an unbeatable configuration based on Jake's projected path. Jake finished tying his shoe, looked up, and went in a completely different direction than the maze had predicted. A direction that shouldn't have even existed based on the corridor configuration. How did he... Kelnax started. There wasn't a path there 3 seconds ago, I confirmed. The maze restructured, and in the millisecond it took to recalculate, he went through a gap that technically didn't exist. That's not possible. And yet... The maze was now trying everything. It generated his lost loved ones, asking him why he abandoned them. Jake said, "Oh, hi, Mom," and kept walking. It created a corridor of infinite length that extended forever. Jake walked down it for 2 minutes, got bored, and apparently the universe itself got uncomfortable with the awkwardness and just let him through. It manifested his greatest regret. Jake looked at it and said, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't have tried to microwave that burrito for 5 minutes. Live and learn." The maze created a test of pure logic that had stumped the Vothrax for decades. Jake ignored it completely because he found a shiny pebble on the ground and was examining that instead. 23 minutes into his attempt, the proximity sensors indicated he was halfway to the center. The control room had gone completely silent. Engineers were taking notes. Xenopsychologists were having quiet, nervous breakdowns. Kelnax was just standing there, with her tentacles hanging limp, watching the screens like they were showing her the heat death of the universe. "This isn't possible," someone whispered. But it was happening. Jake Martinez, human, dressed in cargo shorts and a fanny pack, eating a turkey sandwich, was doing the impossible. He wasn't outsmarting the maze. He wasn't overpowering it. He wasn't achieving some transcendent state of consciousness. He was just walking. Like the maze wasn't even there. Like it was exactly what he'd said it was, straightforward. And the neuromorphic labyrinth, undefeated for 3,000 years, was having what could only be described as an existential crisis. The readouts showed the maze's AI cycling through response protocols faster and faster, each one failing to produce the desired effect. It was trying to find a pattern that didn't exist, trying to exploit weaknesses that weren't configured the way it expected. Jake rounded another corner, completely oblivious to the cosmic scale confusion he was causing. He was humming again. Still the same song. I was really starting to hate that song. Look, I've worked with sophisticated AI systems for 73 cycles. I've seen quantum processors, hive mind networks, and computational matrices that operate in 17 dimensions simultaneously. I've never, not once, seen a machine have what could only be described as a panic attack. Until today, the neuromorphic labyrinth was losing its mind. And I use that phrase deliberately because it genuinely seemed like the ancient AI was developing some form of hysteria. The control room screens were flashing warnings I didn't even know existed in the system. Cognitive pattern recognition failed. Adaptive restructuring ineffective. Psychological leverage points none detected. Error. Subject appears to be thinking about tacos. That last one made Kelnax do a double take. It's monitoring his internal thoughts now? The maze always monitors internal thoughts, I explained, pulling up the consciousness scan. That's how it generates personalized nightmares, but usually it finds fears, traumas, deep-seated anxieties. Look at this. The brain activity scan of Jake Martinez was, for lack of a better word, simple. Disturbingly simple. His thoughts were cycling through what appeared to be walking. Sandwich is pretty good. That's a weird wall. Wonder if they have vending machines here. Tacos would be nice. Left or right? Left. That's it? Kelnax asked. That's what he's thinking about? That's literally it. No complex strategic planning, no analyzing the environment, no psychological preparation. He's just existing, casually. The maze, meanwhile, was trying increasingly desperate tactics. It manifested a corridor filled with Jake's worst memories. Jake walked through it going, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Good times." Well, not good times, but times anyway. It created a spatial loop where every direction led back to the starting point. Jake somehow walked out of it in 3 steps. The engineers couldn't explain it. The physics didn't work. He just did it. The control room was now packed with at least 30 Galactic officials, all watching in stunned silence. Someone from the Historical Archive Department was recording everything, whispering into their device. Cycle 3000, year 247, day 18. Reality appears to be malfunctioning. Requesting backup. The maze tried to generate impossible colors. Jake said, purple. It created a room where time moved backward. Jake walked through it, going forward. It manifested a perfect copy of Jake himself and had them fight. The two Jakes looked at each other, shrugged, and both continued in the same direction. The maze had to despawn the duplicate because it couldn't process the casual cooperation. "This is unprecedented," Kelnack said, which was the understatement of the millennium. "The maze has never failed to categorize a consciousness before. Every mind has patterns, logic patterns, emotional patterns, survival patterns, something. Maybe humans don't have patterns," suggested Vortex, one of the engineers. "Maybe they're just random." "Nothing biological is random," Kelnax countered. "There has to be an explanation." On screen, Jake encountered what the maze labeled as final psychological assault, maximum intensity. It was pulling out everything. Every trick, every exploit, every reality-warping technique developed over 3 millennia of breaking the best minds in the galaxy. It created a philosophical paradox about the nature of consciousness. Jake's response, "Yeah, I think, therefore I think I am." Something like that. I didn't really pay attention in philosophy class. It manifested the concept of infinity and forced Jake to contemplate his own insignificance in the cosmos. Jake looked up at the infinite void and said, "Neat. Kind of like that planetarium I went to once. They had good popcorn." It generated a moral dilemma where Jake had to choose between two equally bad options, knowing that either choice would haunt him forever. Jake picked the left option, said, "Well, that sucks, but okay," and moved on. No haunting detected. The maze's AI core was now displaying something I'd never seen before. Error logs, thousands of them, scrolling faster than I could read. "Subject refuses to engage with existential crisis, cognitive patterns inconsistent with sentient life. Attempting to scan for deeper meaning, no deeper meaning detected. Error, subject's primary thought process is this is taking longer than expected. Error, subject now thinking about tacos again. Error, why are there so many thoughts about tacos?" The senior xenopsychologist, a Wethkar named Dralmok, pushed through the crowd. He'd written 17 books about the neuromorphic labyrinth and was considered the foremost expert on its operation. "This is impossible," he declared. "Show me the scans again." I pulled them up. He studied them with all 6 of his eyes for exactly 4 seconds before his bioluminescent patches turned a distressed shade of orange. "The human isn't resisting the maze," he said slowly. "He's not overcoming its challenges. He's not even acknowledging them as challenges. From his perspective, he's just in a weird building, walking from point A to point B. And sometimes there's strange stuff happening that he finds mildly interesting, but ultimately irrelevant." "So," someone asked, "so the maze can't adapt to that. It's designed to target conscious engagement with the environment. It needs you to try, to struggle, to think your way through. But this human is treating the most sophisticated trial in galactic history like it's an inconvenient hallway," I finished. "Exactly." On screen, Jake stopped walking. The entire control room held their collective breath. Was he finally overwhelmed? Had the maze found his breaking point? Jake pulled out a water bottle from his fanny pack and took a drink. The maze tried to turn the water into a symbol of his mortality, his temporary existence in the universe. Jake said, getting a little warm," and took another sip. Then he kept walking. The AI core started leaving what could only be described as confused messages. "Does not compute. Subject defies categorization. Is this a trick? This feels like a trick. Running diagnostic. Diagnostic confirms I am functioning correctly, so why isn't this working?" 28 minutes into the attempt, Jake stopped to examine a particularly interesting architectural feature of the maze. It was actually a hyperdimensional trap, designed to snare consciousness in an infinite regression loop. The Vothorax crystal had gotten stuck in one of these on day 3. Jake looked at it, said, "Cool design. Looks kind of like that one building downtown, and walked around it. Just walked around it. The maze hadn't even considered that as a possibility. He's improvising, Kelnack said. But he's not improvising with any particular intelligence. He's just doing whatever occurs to him in the moment. The maze can't predict randomness, Dralmok added. But this isn't true randomness. It's worse. It's casual choice. He's making decisions based on criteria so subjective and momentary that there's no pattern to exploit. The proximity sensors started beeping. Jake was approaching the final sector. The center chamber, where the beacon of ascension waited, was now only a few corridors away. The maze made one last desperate attempt. It restructured itself into what it calculated to be the absolute perfect nightmare for human psychology based on Jake's observed behavior. A combination of every failed attempt it had tried, amplified and focused. Jake encountered it, stopped and tilted his head. For a moment I thought the maze had finally got him. His expression changed. He was actually paying attention to something. "Hey," he said to no one in particular, "is that an exit sign?" He'd spotted the corridor to the center chamber. The maze hadn't even tried to hide it because it had been too busy generating psychological warfare scenarios. Jake shrugged and headed toward it. The AI core displayed one final message. "I don't understand humans." Then it just stopped trying. The readings showed the maze entering what could only be described as a sulk. It kept running, kept existing, but it had given up on the concept of defeating Jake Martinez. In the control room, we watched in absolute silence as a human in cargo shorts walked toward the most sacred achievement in galactic civilization, eating a sandwich and humming a song about roads and horses. The unbeatable had been beaten, not through genius, not through strength, not through some transcendent spiritual awakening, through sheer, absolute, terrifying obliviousness. The center chamber of the neuromorphic labyrinth is designed to be overwhelming. It's a perfect sphere about 50 meters in diameter. Walls made of some crystalline material that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The beacon of ascension floats in the exact center, suspended in a field of pure potential energy, glowing with light that's somehow all colors and no colors at the same time. The room is designed to be the final test. Just being in there is supposed to trigger a moment of profound self-realization. Every species that's gotten close, and maybe 3 have in the past 3 millennia, reported that entering the chamber forced them to confront the fundamental truth of their existence. It's supposed to be spiritually transformative, the kind of experience that changes you on a molecular level. Jake Martinez walked in, looked around, and said, "Huh, shiny." The beacon's energy field pulsed, initiating what should have been a deep psychic connection. A moment where the candidate proves their worthiness by demonstrating growth, understanding, transcendence. The culmination of a spiritual journey through the maze. Jake walked up to the beacon, still chewing the last bite of his sandwich, and just picked it up. Just reached out and grabbed it like it was a coffee mug on a shelf. The beacon usually requires a whole process. You're supposed to meditate, prove your understanding of cosmic truth, demonstrate that you've learned something from your journey through the maze. It's supposed to take hours, sometimes days. Jake picked it up in about 4 seconds. "Neat," he said, turning it over in his hands. "Good weight, feels quality." Then he put it in his fanny pack. He put the most sacred object in galactic civilization, the symbol of transcendent achievement and species-wide worthiness, in his fanny pack. Right next to what appeared to be some loose change and a pack of gum. The control room had gone completely silent. 37 highly educated officials from dozens of species, collectively holding probably 2,000 advanced degrees, all standing there with their mouths, beaks, breathing orifices, or whatever hanging open. "Did he just—" Vortax started. "Yep," I confirmed. "But the spiritual journey, the self-realization, the proof of—" "Yep." The beacon's energy readings were going haywire. It was trying to initiate the worthiness protocol, trying to test Jake's spiritual development, trying to do its job. But Jake had already moved on. He was looking at the exit corridor, probably wondering if there were, in fact, any vending machines in the facility. The maze made one last attempt. One final, desperate try at salvaging something from this disaster. It generated what it called the existential crisis zone, a pocket of reality where beings were forced to confront questions like, what is the meaning of existence? Why do we struggle? What is the purpose of consciousness in an uncaring universe? Jake walked into it, and the questions manifested around him in glowing text, in spoken word, in pure thought form, beamed directly into his consciousness. The fundamental questions of philosophy, the deep inquiries that had driven species to enlightenment or madness. What is the meaning of your existence? The maze asked, putting everything it had left into the question. Jake thought about this for maybe 3 seconds. I could see his thought process on the monitors. Meaning, dunno, he said out loud. Probably pizza. No, wait, I said that already. I guess just like being nice to people? And maybe eating good food? Is that a thing? That seems like a thing. What is your purpose? The maze pressed, generating reality-warping emphasis around the words. Purpose? Man, I don't know. I work in accounting. I guess making sure the numbers add up? That's kind of a purpose. Oh, and I've got a cat. Feeding my cat is definitely a purpose. You ever have a cat? They're very insistent about dinner time. But what is the meaning of it all? The maze was practically begging now. Jake shrugged. I mean, does there have to be some big cosmic meaning? Seems like a lot of pressure. I'm just kind of living, you know? Day by day. Sometimes there's pizza, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you get to pet a dog. That's pretty good. I saw a really nice sunset last week. That was cool. The existential crisis zone flickered, wavered, and then just dissipated. You can't have an existential crisis if you're not having an existential crisis. The logic was infallible. Jake found the exit corridor and started walking. 29 minutes had passed since he entered the maze. The previous record, remember, was 47 hours of screaming. He'd beaten it by 46 hours, 30 minutes, and 13 seconds, and he'd done it while finishing a sandwich, staying hydrated, and tying his shoe once. As he approached the exit, I realized I was going to have to go down there and officially certify his completion. It's part of my job. Congratulate the successful candidate. Present them with the official documentation. Explain the significance of their achievement. I'd never had to actually do it before, because nobody had ever succeeded. I met Jake at the exit gate as it opened. He walked out, looking slightly bored, and gave me a little wave. Hey again. That was interesting. Definitely some weird stuff in there. Is there a bathroom nearby? I really should have gone before. I just stared at him, all 3 of my eyes, full intensity. Mr. Martinez, do you have any idea what you just did? The maze thing, right? Got the shiny beacon. He patted his fanny pack. Check. You completed the neuromorphic labyrinth in under 30 minutes. The previous record was 47 hours. You're the first being in 3,000 years to successfully retrieve the Beacon of Ascension. Oh, cool. So humanity gets the space license thing? Yes, humanity gets the space license thing. Mr. Martinez, you just achieved the impossible. You should be transformed, enlightened, fundamentally changed by the experience. What did you learn in there? Jake thought about this, taking the question seriously for maybe the first time since he'd arrived. I learned that turkey sandwiches hold up pretty well in weird environments, he said finally. Also, that I should definitely check for bathrooms before starting things. That's probably the big takeaway. Behind me, I heard Kelnax make a sound that I can only describe as a xenopsychologist is soul leaving their body. Jake looked past me at the crowd of officials who'd gathered to witness his exit. Hey, is that guy okay? He pointed at Dralmok, who had sat down on the floor, and was staring at nothing, quietly questioning his entire life's work. He'll be fine, probably, eventually. I pulled out my datapad, which I'd preloaded with the certification documents approximately 70 cycles ago, thinking I'd never need them. Mr. Martinez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I hereby certify your successful completion of the neuromorphic labyrinth trial. Humanity is hereby granted full advanced space travel privileges and all associated rights and responsibilities. Sweet. He pulled the beacon out of his fanny pack to look at it again. So do I keep this, or does it go back in there? You're supposed to keep it. It's the proof of your achievement, the symbol of your species' worthiness. Right. Might look good on my desk. My cat will probably knock it over, but whatever. I completed the documentation in stunned silence. Signature here, thumbprint there, verify species designation. All the bureaucratic elements I'd processed for 847 failures now being used for the first success in recorded history. Okay, so, bathroom? Jake asked again. I pointed down the corridor. He thanked me, tucked the beacon back in his fanny pack next to his gum, and wandered off. The gathered officials slowly started to disperse, many of them looking like they'd witnessed something that broke their understanding of reality. Which, to be fair, they had. Kelnax approached me, her tentacles drooping with exhaustion despite not having physically done anything. Crix, she said quietly. What just happened? I looked at my datapad, at the official certification with Jake Martinez's name on it, at the sensor logs that proved he'd really done it. I have absolutely no idea, I admitted. But I'm pretty sure we're going to regret this in about 50 years when humans have somehow accidentally conquered half the galaxy. She didn't argue. We both knew I was probably right. The emergency council session was called for the next cycle. When I say emergency, I mean they pulled representatives from 18 sectors, interrupted 4 diplomatic summits, and had people scrambling through hyperspace gates at speeds that probably violated several safety regulations. The chamber was packed with the galaxy's finest minds, all demanding answers to the same question. How in the name of all that exists did a human beat the neuromorphic labyrinth? I was seated at the witness podium, datapad full of sensor logs, ready to present my findings. Next to me was Drelmok, who'd recovered enough to stop staring blankly at walls, but still had the look of someone whose worldview had been shattered. Kelnax was there too, along with a dozen other experts who'd been studying the data all night. The council arbiter, an ancient Ythnarian named Kesrath, called the session to order. Administrator Crix, please present your analysis of yesterday's events. I stood, activating the holographic display. Jake's path through the maze appeared in the air, a simple line weaving through the complex three-dimensional structure. Distinguished members of the council, after extensive analysis, we've reached several conclusions about how human Jake Martinez completed the trial, and I'm warning you now you're not going to like any of them. I pulled up the cognitive scans. The neuromorphic labyrinth works by analyzing thought patterns and adapting to exploit cognitive weaknesses. Logic-based species get logic traps. Emotional species get emotional manipulation. The system has successfully categorized and defeated 847 different species over 3 millennia. We know this, Kesrath said impatiently. Tell us what went wrong. Nothing went wrong. The maze functioned perfectly. The problem is that human cognition is, and I'm using the technical term here, completely unhinged. Murmurs filled the chamber. I continued. Humans have the capability for complex, logical thought. They can do advanced mathematics, create sophisticated technology, engage in abstract reasoning. They're not stupid. But, and here's the critical part, they don't have to use those capabilities. They can just choose not to. I pulled up Jake's brain scans. Watch his neural activity during the maze. He's capable of analyzing the situation, strategizing, planning. All those higher functions are available, but he's not using them. He's operating on what humans apparently call vibes. Vibes? Several council members repeated in confused unison. Best translation I can get. It's a sort of intuitive, feeling-based decision-making process that has no logical foundation, but also isn't purely emotional. It's its own thing. Humans can just decide that something feels right and do it without any deeper analysis. Kelnax took over, pulling up comparative data. We've been studying human history and culture since this incident. It turns out this is how they make most of their decisions. They're capable of overthinking, yes, but they're equally capable of underthinking, sometimes simultaneously. Their brains can hold contradictory thoughts without experiencing cognitive dissonance. That's impossible, declared Vornash, a crystalline collective representative. Neural patterns must be consistent. Not for humans, Kelnax said. They can be brilliant scientists who also believe their lucky socks help them perform better. They can understand probability while also thinking, but maybe this time it'll be different. They simultaneously know they should do something and simply not do it. Their cognition is paradoxical by design. I pulled up more data. The maze tried everything. Fear, logic, emotion, existential dread, spatial manipulation, temporal distortion. And Jake acknowledged these things. He saw them. His brain registered them. He just didn't care. Not in an enlightened, transcendent way. In a whatever way. But how did he navigate to the center? Kesrath demanded. Surely that required some logic, some pattern. That's the terrifying part, I said. We analyzed his decision-making at every junction. There was no pattern. Sometimes he chose left because it looked better. Sometimes he chose right because he'd gone left the last time and variety seemed nice. Once, he chose a direction because, and this is a direct quote from his thought scan, that way has better lighting. Dralmok finally spoke up, his voice hollow. The maze tries to predict behavior based on cognitive patterns. But if there's no consistent pattern, if decisions are made on momentary whims that even the decision-maker doesn't fully understand, then there's nothing to predict. The human didn't beat the maze through superiority. He beat it through sheer cognitive chaos. The chamber erupted in discussion. I let them process for a moment before continuing. Here's what we know about humans now. They're tool users who sometimes use tools incorrectly and succeed anyway. They're social creatures who constantly misunderstand each other but function despite it. They make plans and then ignore their own plans. They're anxious about everything and simultaneously cavalier about danger. They're walking contradictions. I pulled up footage of Jake's journey one more time. Watch this moment here. The maze generates his deepest fear. He acknowledges it with, yeah, that was rough. Not, this isn't real or, I can overcome this. Just, yep, that happened, moving on. And the maze has no defense against that level of casual acceptance. Kelnax added, we've been reviewing human history. Do you know how they discovered penicillin? By accident. How they invented the microwave? By accident. They split the atom while trying to understand physics, then immediately weaponized it. Then used it for medicine and power generation. They're simultaneously brilliant and reckless, careful and careless. They sent beings into space before they fully understood the radiation environment, I continued. They invented the airplane without completely understanding aerodynamics. They domesticated wolves into pets. Their entire evolutionary history is just a series of, let's try this and see what happens. A council member from the Logical Concordance stood up. Surely we can't allow such an unpredictable species to have advanced space travel privileges. They're dangerous. Oh, they're absolutely dangerous, I agreed. But they passed the trial. The oldest, most sacred trial in our civilization. And according to our own rules, that means they've earned the right. Unless you want to argue that our most fundamental test is invalid. Silence. Nobody wanted to argue that. Kesrath looked pained. So, what do we do? We give them the space license, I said, because we have to. But more importantly, we start preparing for what happens next. Because humans don't overthink. They don't get paralyzed by considering all possible outcomes. They just do things. They try stuff. They see what happens. I pulled up a projection. Based on their historical behavior patterns, or lack thereof, I estimate within 50 cycles, humans will have explored more systems than species that have had spaceflight for centuries. Not because they're better at it, because they won't stop to consider if they should. Within a century, Kelnax added, they'll have either made first contact with a dozen new species or accidentally started 3 diplomatic incidents. Possibly both. Their history is full of them stumbling into situations, causing chaos, somehow resolving it through equally chaotic means, and then acting like it was the plan all along. Dralmok spoke again, and he actually smiled. A tired, slightly unhinged smile. The maze couldn't break Jake Martinez because there was nothing to break. No rigid logical framework to shatter, no emotional core to exploit, no cognitive pattern to disrupt. Just a being who looked at the impossible and thought neat before moving on with his day. So the official finding, Kesrath said slowly, is that humans beat the trial through what? Ignorance. Not ignorance, I corrected. Selective engagement. They choose when to think deeply and when to just wing it, and they're completely unpredictable about which they'll do at any given moment. That's what makes them terrifying. The Council voted. Humanity's certification was approved, It had to be. The rules were the rules, and humans had followed them, even if they'd done so in the most incomprehensible way possible. As the session ended and representatives filed out, many of them muttering about revising the trial for future species, I looked at the final piece of data on my pad, the maze's last error message, the one that summed up our 3,000-year-old perfect test's final assessment of humanity. Species incomprehensible, recommend caution, possibly recommend hiding. 3 days later, I heard that Jake Martinez had returned to Earth and was selling t-shirts that said, "I beat the maze, and all I got was this lousy shirt," and advanced space travel rights for my entire species. He was apparently making decent money, had already sold out his first run, and was negotiating licensing deals. He'd also started a blog about his experience. The first post was titled, "That Weird Space Hallway I Walked Through, a Review." 3 stars, points deducted for lack of bathroom facilities and vending machines. Kelnax found me in my office later that week. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's generally a good practice. What if they're not just chaos? What if humans have evolved a form of cognition that's actually adaptive in a way we don't understand? What if their ability to be both intelligent and utterly casual is actually strategically optimal?" I thought about Jake Martinez walking through impossible geometry while humming a song, treating cosmic horror like a mild inconvenience, achieving the unachievable through sheer, absolute disregard for the magnitude of the challenge. "You know what, Kelnax? That's somehow more terrifying than the alternative." She nodded slowly. "In 50 years, when humans have accidentally discovered something revolutionary or catastrophically broken, something we thought was unbreakable, remember this conversation." "Oh, I will. I absolutely will." I looked out my office window at the stars, at the vast galaxy that humanity was about to be unleashed upon, and had a thought that I'm sure echoed through the minds of countless council members. We're going to regret this. We're definitely going to regret this. But also, somewhere in the back of my mind, another thought emerged. It's going to be absolutely hilarious to watch. Humans. The galaxy wasn't ready for them. Hell, I wasn't ready for them, and I'd been preparing for 73 cycles. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and its latest joke was a species that could pass the impossible trial by simply not understanding why it was impossible. The punchline, I suspected, was going to take centuries to fully land. And somewhere on Earth, Jake Martinez was probably eating pizza, completely unaware that he'd fundamentally changed galactic civilization's understanding of consciousness, cognition, and what it means to be ready for the stars. 5 stars for the pizza, probably. Unlike the maze, pizza had good bathroom access, human priorities. The galaxy would learn, whether it wanted to or not.